Welcome to another edition of Ozarks Voices. My name is Tom Peters. I'm the Dean of Libraries here at Missouri State University. Today's date is Friday, July 8th of 2016, and our guest today is Todd Parnell. Todd, welcome.
Thank you very much.
We're here in Meyer Library, Duane G. Meyer Library on the campus of Missouri State University in Springfield, Missouri. And Todd has, you've lived in the Ozarks all your life?
No.
Oh,
I
okay.
spent my early years here, and I was gone for most of the time until 20 years ago when I came back.
Oh, okay. So, well, let's start with where and when and where were you born?
Branson, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
Today, 69 years ago. July
All right.
8th, 1947.
All right. Happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm feeling every one of those years today.
Yeah. So what was it like growing up in Branson? In the 50s would have been when you were sort of aware of...
Right. I'm sure you suppress the things that aren't fun, but to me, in my memory, it's almost idyllic. I mean, it was a very small town, very friendly town. You didn't lock the doors at night. The same old small town stuff you hear about that is true. Yeah. And people are always looking out for you. And I grew up on a creek, Roark Creek, and spent an awful lot of time back there fishing. I lived next door to my grandparents, and my grandmother used to love to take me fishing down there. Just lots of fond memories.
Right. Today, I think the population of Branson proper is 11,000, 12,000. It's still pretty
8
small.
million. 8 million during this. you add up the summer,
But the permanent population is still pretty small.
Yeah.
Yeah. But back in the 50s, what was the population?
I seem to remember a sign that was like 710 or something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And so this is anybody listening or watching this, you think, well, I've been to Branson if you've been to Branson in the last 40 years, forget all that, because it was just a small town.
Right. It was a small town. It was a classic small town.
Yeah.
There was a lot going on. It was always an entrepreneurial town. They seemed to attract people that were intent on doing things and accomplishing things. It wasn't sleepy.
Yeah. And it was still it was a tourist destination.
It was, and what's interesting, you go back in the early part of the century, and Power Site Dam was built, which opened up a tourist opportunity, and then Jim Owen brought float trips in the 30s, and those were nationally known. He was featured on one of his floats was featured in Life magazine in 1941.
I think he actually made the cover of Life magazine like twice.
Yeah. And it was a film mecca for several small. I wouldn't say companies, but filmmakers set up there to make films. And then, of course, Shepherd of the Hills and Carol Bell Wright brought some notoriety to it. Yeah, I mean,
did Shepherd of the Hills, the novel, really kind of, was that the start of...
Probably put it on the map. I think that was 1906 or 1907, and that probably put Branson on the map. Although people were coming to Branson from Kansas City and St. Louis on the train to go fishing, to go hunting. Yeah. And they'd bring their boats down back in the early part of that century.
Yeah, it was a real, float trips were a big part.
They were a big deal. The White River was a magnificent resource.
Yeah. Well, I know you've been a banker.
Yes.
You've been a university president.
Yep.
You've been an author of nonfiction, works of nonfiction.
Yep.
And you're currently an author of fiction. So we'll come back to all that. But I know you're also passionate about water resources in the Ozarks. And so how did that get started? And how do you see what's that all about?
Well, it got started growing up on that creek.
Yeah.
It's in my blood, and I was blessed to have that experience. I have spent a lot of time in the Ozarks on the streams, incredible floating streams, incredible, beautiful woods and springs and creeks and everything. And having had that privilege, I think it's my responsibility to assure that those that follow me have that opportunity. That if I'm not instrumental in helping protect those waters, I've failed as part of my responsibility for being given all the blessings I have.
Yeah. What do you see as the main risks for the water resources in the Ozarks?
They've shifted over time. When we moved back to Springfield back in the late 90s, and that's when there was an awful lot of pollution going into the James River arm, and it was polluting Table Rock Lake, and Branson was dumping stuff in, and there was as I recall, a 17-mile algae bloom on the James River that made its way down to Table Rock. And you know, I was just shocked having come home for the first time in many, many years. And a lot of grassroots organizations were getting involved in. They generated some action out of the cities, out of the municipalities. Springfield was the first to really spend some money on cleaning up its wastewater treatment. Nixon, Ozark followed, Branson did, and that phase of it kind of got cleaned up. And today the James River, which I float on a lot, is really in good shape. Still there are septics and that aren't tended to, but even Stone County, as independent of cusses as they are, they now require that you get your septic inspected before you sell it. And all of us should be responsible for that, but they require it, so I'm really pleased with that. I see other risks that are going to impact the future. Number one is corporate agriculture. Corporate agriculture is moving into Missouri and northwest Arkansas. In Missouri, it's been here for quite a while, but our karst topography is just, it's not meant to process the things that flow out of that, and it's growing, and that part of our economy is growing.
So when you say corporate agriculture, are we really talking about animal-based?
Yep. Most of them are, in the Ozarks, most of them are chickens and turkeys.
Yeah.
Although they put a pig CAFO on the Buffalo River several years ago that just was an atrocious idea.
Yeah.
And you know, the fact that could happen just blows my mind. You know, we got some of the most incredible water resources in the country, if not the world, and people get that, and then they kind of lose sight of it when something else comes in to appears to have an economic development impact.
Jobs and economic sometimes make blind us to that.
So I see that as a major threat. I see continuing growth as a major threat, and our ability to handle stormwater runoff and the things that go with that. It's people's the threat. Bottom line. And that's, you can't do much about it because there's no reason why people wouldn't want to live here.
Now, my background's not in agriculture, but I remember reading.
You're from Iowa, though, right?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So I
So you know about it.
I lived in a intensive agricultural state.
Yep.
Down here, read Brooks Blevin's book about the Ozarks, and kind of focused on the Arkansas Ozarks, but it was kind of heavy on the agricultural part of it. And what I remember was people in the Ozarks have tried to grow just about everything imaginable. First they started with cotton and tobacco because that's sort of what they knew. And then, it was like apples, strawberries, chickens, tomatoes, dairy cattle. Now we seem to be, I talk to people in the School of Ag here, and it's like, we really think beef cattle is if anything's agricultural sustainable here, it's beef cattle. So, but you didn't mention beef cattle as a threat to water resources.
Well, I think it would be if you did it in large scale operations.
Yeah, we don't have
it's scale.
Yeah, we don't have cattle confinement. They're basically feeding off of the fescue meadows that populate the Ozarks, and so again I don't know, but
large scale is the thing that concerns me the most.
And when you get confinement, whether it's chickens or cattle or hogs,
pigs,
that's what you really.
Well, it's interesting where you grew up in Iowa. Has paid the price in many ways with their water supply and the quality of water for their aggressive, I think, embrace of CAFOs. And they've tightened up. And Missouri has very, very limited regulation. You and I could figure out how to start a pig CAFO if we wanted to. And that's not going unnoticed by corporate farmers in Iowa or Minnesota or Illinois that see their own backyards kind of getting regulated more and prices going up, and they see cheap land prices here and they see lax regulations, and it's like putting a bullseye on our state.
You didn't mention dams.
That's an
It's
interesting.
probably a kind of within your own family. It's kind of a touchy subject, isn't
Well,
it?
it's not touchy, but it's an interesting dichotomy. My great grandfather, James Madison Parnell, and was instrumental in getting Power Site Dam located and built and getting a road to Springfield. His son, Albert Parnell, had the commissary at the site for building Power Site Dam, and I think there were 2,000 people
Yeah,
that
it was
lived there.
a
And
tent city.
that's what got him started in business. So he was a merchant. So
Yeah.
great deal of benefit that accrued to them from that dam. My father was the head of the effort to build Table Rock Dam, and he did it for the same reasons that the Corps of Engineers was doing it everywhere. You do it for flood control and power generation, but for the jobs that come with it and for the economic development. He really saw the potential for tourism, and he was right.
Mhm.
He was right. It has impacted our region, and I've heard everything from, I don't know, $500 million to $1 billion of economic development impact from Table Rock Lake alone. So it's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge, and all the more reason to be really protective of the water quality.
Mhm.
So those three generations saw it a little differently than I did, because
Yeah.
the first thing I remember was the Buffalo River, which I was floating, was being threatened with a dam going in, not just one but two,
Yeah.
which would have just absolutely destroyed one of the most unique and beautiful landscapes,
Yeah.
water landscapes in the world. And fortunately, some enlightened folks, led by Neil Compton of all people, OB, an obstetrician, set up an organization called the Ozarks Society, and they led the defense of the Buffalo River, and they got it designated as America's first national river with the help of some political clout. John Paul Hammersmith comes to mind. So that's my side of it.
Yeah.
And I'm against any other dams going in. I can tell you that much. They've talked about damming up the Spring River, I think it is, or something down in Joplin, because of the tremendous risk of water supply down there. They're projected to run out of water sometime in the next 20 years unless something changes. It's all surface water, and the water table's dropping. So
Most of Springfield relies on surface water.
yeah, we got Stockton Lake.
Yeah.
And wisely, we locked into a long-term contract. And in fact, City Utilities just drew down their second tranche of that.
Yeah.
And Springfield's got water going forward. What's going to be interesting are the surrounding communities, and whether Springfield's going to end up being a profit center for selling water or not, and which will be an interesting dilemma. I taught a class with Peter Browning at Drury in the ethics of water supply, and I was really stunned and kind of excited that every single student in that class thought access to water was a human right.
Yeah.
And that runs
Good
against
water.
the profit.
Potable water.
Yeah, right. Runs against the profit motive that we're going to end up in if the water supply keeps shrinking.
Yeah. And the West is they have all kinds of agreements in place. Some of them go back 100 years,
and they're in trouble.
They're in trouble.
They're in trouble.
Do you remember the White River before?
Oh yeah, I floated on.
Before Table Rock went in?
Oh yeah. You
remember the building of Table Rock Dam?
Yep. I floated the Eagle Rock, I think is the name of the put-in spot on the upper White River, but and of course that was before Beaver Dam too.
Yeah.
So it was still a White River all the way down to Table Rock.
So what were your thoughts? So you were a boy when it was dammed up.
Yeah.
And what were your thoughts? Did you feel
Didn't think much about it.
I
I just liked to fish. No, I enjoyed actually the trout fishing that came from it, but it didn't strike me as to the extent as it would today. And I can't say that they were wrong. I really can't. I didn't live then. I didn't know what the economic pressures were and what the value added was, and it's been huge. It would have been wrong, in my view, to dam the Buffalo River. It would have been an egregious error.
Yeah. But the White was a scenic river too.
Yeah.
before it was all.
Yeah.
It's pretty much all dammed up now.
Yeah, it is.
There's
4
no-
dams. Yeah.
There's very little free flowing.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
I've actually, sounds bizarre, but I've actually tried to find out about the building of Power Site Dam, and there's not a lot that I could find.
Yeah.
But your great grandfather.
My great grandfather and my
Was it-
grandfather were
Yeah.
instrumental.
Did they tell any stories about the building of Power Site Dam?
No, but I've got some pictures in there that
All
you
right.
let you. Actually, there was.
Privately built.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the electrical power generated by Power Site Dam came to Springfield years before it came to Forsyth.
Yeah, I don't know that for a fact.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But there also was this underlying sense of tourism back then.
Yeah.
I think that's when Rockaway Beach
Yeah, it became a big
was a
big,
and the Merriam Company was involved in development of that.
Yeah. And like you say, especially for St. Louis, sort of wealthy St. Louis families, this was a place to come and relax and fish and hunt and
Well, my interest in the lake system goes to the feeders to the lake system, and we still have some incredibly beautiful streams and creeks, and Bull Creek and Swan Creek and Beaver Creek are all they're not pristine, but they're pretty darn clean, and they're incredibly fun to spend time on.
Yeah. A few minutes ago you mentioned that, really, ultimately humans are the problem.
And
or the cause of,
I don't mean that negatively, because I'm
change.
one of those humans.
Yeah, cause of change in the natural environment. So the bicentennial of Henry Rowe Schoolcraft's sojourn into what he called the semi-alpine region known as the Ozarks.
Yeah.
Is coming up here in 2 years, and I've read his journal a couple of times.
It's fascinating.
It's very fascinating, but I actually had a high school student come in and interview me about that, and she kind of, in response to one of her questions, I said, in a way, you need to forget what you know about the Ozarks, because that wasn't the Ozarks that Henry Rowe Schoolcraft experienced. So there were these cane breaks down in the lower bottomland. There were prairies where the grass was as tall as a man on a horse. And there was old growth forests. So the forests even were different than what you experience today. And the thing that really, Milt Rafferty has pointed this out, is that whenever I cross over a bridge, I look at the creek bed. And what you see now is a lot of gravel. And there's a lot of speculation that wasn't the way the creek beds were in the Ozarks back when Henry Rowe Schoolcraft was traipsing around. That's all because of logging and human development. It's even changed our creek beds, and some creek beds around here, they actually periodically have to go in and bulldoze the gravel out of the way.
Right. Yeah. And the flooding moves the gravel in such a way that it can change the channel pretty dramatically. My favorite scene out of that Schoolcraft book is the one where he urges his horse to go into the White River because it looks like he sees the bottom, he thinks it's 2 feet deep, and he immediately sinks 10 feet in and has to scramble to get out.
Yeah, I mean, the streams and rivers must have been just absolutely clear.
Pristine.
Well, okay, so you came back to the region in the 90s. You left. When did you leave Branson?
I left in 1961. I graduated from the 8th grade, and I went to high school in Washington, D.C. And I think I told you my dad was the president of the school board and was kind of lamenting the fact he didn't think the education was as good as he would like for it to be. And he had his only sister, and her family lived in Washington, D.C., and their kids were in a school that they were just very high on, and they invited me to come live with them. It wasn't a boarding school, it was a Quaker school, the Sidwell Friends School. And so I went and lived with them my freshman year, and my uncle got transferred, and that's when my parents said, you want to come on back home, and I liked it well enough that I chose to stay, and they found a teacher for me to live with, and I finished out my 4 years there.
Okay. Did you come home in the summer?
Yeah.
Did you miss the Ozarks? Did you miss Branson and the streams?
Always,
and,
yeah.
I mean, compared to DC, it's a totally different.
Yeah, totally different.
Totally different environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I got my fix of that in the summer.
Yeah. And then you went on to college and you
Came back to Drury and
Yeah.
went to Drury for 4 years, and then I went to the business school at Dartmouth, the Tuck School,
Mhm.
for 2 years.
And then you lived outside the area for most of your adult life.
Yeah.
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 Whereabouts?
Washington D.C.
Mhm.
Spent 3 years there with the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. St. Louis in a credit program with a large regional bank. Then out to Los Angeles to run their Los Angeles office, and then back to St. Louis, and kind of worked my way the opposite way down the food chain, from large banks to mid-sized banks to being CEO of the smallest bank in St. Louis, to coming back to Springfield and starting a bank with a group of investors.
Yeah. And your family's history is banking.
Banking. Yep. I think I am. I think I'm 6th generation Ozarks and 5th generation banker.
Wow.
And that's where it's stopping, because none of my kids want anything to do with it.
So when you came back, you got writing about the Ozarks. First nonfiction.
Yeah.
What prompted you to begin writing? Just writing, and B, you've written about the Ozarks pretty much.
Yeah. What got me started was a trip that I was fortunate to take, a real adventure with my son, when he was 13 years old, as kind of an incentive to him. He was struggling in middle school, didn't want to be in school. He loved the outdoors, and we gave him an incentive that if he would apply himself and improve his grades, I would take pretty much the whole family vacation 2 weeks and float the entire Buffalo River with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that, and it was a remarkable exercise in personal growth, not just for him, but for me too. It was an amazing adventure. And when I got back from that, I wanted to save it. I wanted to save it for him so that he would know that what he did as a young lad, and I want to save it for myself too, to go back and reflect on from time to time, because when you're out there for 10 or 11, 12 days and you're not around people, you can reflect differently than you can in the flow of life.
Yeah.
So that got me started, and then from then I just kind of kept going. I wrote, I remember on D-Day, I guess it probably would have been the 50th anniversary of D-Day. I was out at my mother's parents' gravestone, and she was talking to me, telling me, you know where I was 50 years ago? And I said, no. She said, I was in the Red Cross following the troops across Germany to begin the push to the end of the war. Mm-hmm. And I asked her a question, and she said, well, if you want to know about it, come back to my apartment. And she gave me this German ammunition box that was chock full of her correspondence to her parents, pictures, diaries, everything. And so I spent the next 2 years basically loving dealing in that and organizing it into a book to pay tribute to her.
Uh-huh.
And that was fun. And then I did the Branson story, Postcards from Branson, because my parents, when we moved back here in 1997, they were bigger hoarders than even I am, and they had saved every single piece of paper and picture and story. And my wife wanted me to get rid of it, and I said, well, let me put it down in a book form, and then I'll get rid of it. And I did.
Yeah, good. And then you turned to fiction recently.
Just recently.
Yeah.
Just recently.
So what prompted that?
My wife. I think I told you.
Was it a good prompt or a
it was a little
prompt?
bit of an insult, actually. When I retired from Drury after being president there for 6 years, we went on a trip. We wanted to celebrate the joy that had been that experience, and then try to figure out how to get back to being retired again. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting in the airport and saying, I want to write again. I really enjoyed that in my first retirement from banking. And she looked at me in a serious look and said, for God's sake, don't write any more about your family. Everybody's sick of those stories. I kind of. And I said, well, what do I write? And she says, you write fiction, and it's easy. You write about something you're passionate about. The Ozarks, growing up in a small town, creeks and streams. You make it a mystery. You put some brutal murders in it, some mayhem, some corruption, some sex, and even a little supernatural, and just make it up and let it rip. And I followed her recipe, and I've had a ball doing it.
And you're still doing it. So you got two trilogies in the works, right?
I do.
So you're working on 2 books at the same time?
No, I finished the first trilogy, and the first.
Oh, the first trilogy is finished?
Yeah, that was Skunk Creek came out in December. Swine Branch, and you can imagine what that's going to be about.
Yeah.
Comes out in September, and then the third one, Donnybrook, is with the publisher, and is supposed to come out in the spring.
Well, this is Pennell.
Pennell Publishing. And then I just kept writing, and because I thought this might be kind of fun to continue into the next generation. So the next trilogy is called Children of the Creek. The first one is the Ozarkian folktale trilogy, and this one's Children of the Creek, which is the next generation.
Right. Well, I'm not a native Ozarker, but I'm just fascinated by the region, and both the fiction and the nonfiction of the region. On the fiction
the two
side,
get pretty close.
Yeah. There's not kind of a thin line.
Yeah.
Between, on the fiction side, I sort of had an epiphany when I was reading Skunk Creek. I was like, I'm an old English major, so I was like, I could teach a course on, I would call it like Ozarks noir. It's like dark mysteries. You got David Woodrell, you've got you've got Laura McHugh wrote a really interesting mystery novel. I just started one last night by C.B. Mackenzie. So there's enough there that you could teach a course that books are all kind of the same mood, and it's always like a grisly murder and some kind of what you call it, sexual shenanigans of some sort, some humor.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a genre, sort of like a subgenre.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you were writing in that genre? And sometimes, frankly, when I read your book, I thought it was a send-up of that subgenre.
Yeah.
You were kind of...
I didn't realize that until somebody told me that.
So I'm not the first. I feel like vindicated or something. I'm not the first one who has this idea.
No, but what I was having fun writing, and the people that liked it when I showed it to them thought it was funny. The people that didn't get the humor. Yeah. And so I finally went to a close friend here in town that reads a lot, and he's a civic leader. He knows the community. And I said, if I kind of wandered across the line here, and he read it, and he got back and he said, no, you haven't. He said, I really like it. It's different than anything I've ever read. It's funny. You've written an Ozarkian folktale. Go read your Vance Randolph. Yeah. And I did. Yeah. And Vance Randolph was an amazing collector of stories and songs, and you have archives, I think, here with him, and he's extremely humorous, and in a bawdy kind of way. Yeah. And then I guess the book that really, if I had to say I set out to do something similar, was something called The Architecture of the Arkansas Ozarks. And I read, Dr. Blevins had me read that, and I swear it's the funniest book I've ever read. I laughed out loud all the way through it, and I've read some other Harrington books, but that takes the case. It's hilarious.
It's interesting that I'd heard, and I think it seems like it was from a reliable source, that he was like a professor at the University of Arkansas.
Yeah.
And he's gone to his reward now, and I hope I'm not speaking ill of him, but I heard that he had a drinking problem, and it's a hilarious book. I agree with you completely. It's a hilarious book, and it's really kind of a classic. Yeah. And when he published it, he got kind of lukewarm reviews, and people like
I can relate to that.
Yeah, people are like, I don't get the humor in it, or this is over the top, and it just put him in like this complete funk that he'd put so much in him. I'm sure he must have really worked at this book.
Oh, absolutely.
And maybe that's true of a lot of authors. It's almost like after they die is when people sort of say, Moby Dick's a great novel.
Well, I never would have heard of it if I hadn't taken Dr. Blevins' course and he hadn't been my advisor. Yeah. And
I'm really kind of surprised that this isn't in every, middle class
living room. This was not in our class.
In the Ozarks.
It was after I finished his class, and I said, come on, give me some good stuff to read about the Ozarks, and that's the first one that popped up.
Yeah.
And
So
it influenced my my trilogy and
Yeah.
the work I'm doing today.
okay. So we haven't talked about your Drury years. So how'd you get involved in Drury and
As a student or as president?
well, let's admit both, maybe. I don't know. You know. Why'd you come back to go to Drury? Why'd you attend Drury?
I think it goes back to your earlier question. I was homesick. I miss the Ozarks.
Yeah.
And our family had a long history at Drury and a very rewarding one. And when my parents presented that idea to me, I jumped at it. And you know, I applied to some schools out east, but it was time for me to get home.
Yeah.
And so I came back and
Didn't regret it.
no, not at all. And I never would have made it to the Tuck School if it hadn't been for Drury, because Drury had this unique, you know, back then, getting into the Tuck School at Dartmouth was a heck of a lot easier than it is today. First of all, they didn't have women.
I think that's true of a lot of.
I think it is.
graduate
And Drury had a couple of connections that would get you interviews, and it just so happened that the fellow that preceded me from Drury the year before I went had the highest grades in the whole Tuck School class. So, you know, he kind of paved the way for just an old b-boy here that was able to go in and ride his coattails. But that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gone to Drury.
Yeah.
So it was just it was a marvelous experience. I spent Drury's. I don't need to tell you, it's a wonderful educational environment.
Yeah,
It's
I went to a small
school.
liberal arts college.
Yeah. Which one did you go to?
Grinnell College.
Oh, that's an incredible school.
Yeah. And I've never regretted it.
No.
You know, and public higher education is great. You know,
Sure
Missouri
it is.
State and
Absolutely.
Mizzou and Iowa and
Yep.
Michigan and, you know, but I think there's a role and a value in
Yep.
the small liberal arts college.
I give Drury 100% of the credit for, in my first retirement when I'm in my late 50s, Dr. Baker here at MSU is a very close friend, and he and I used to love to talk history. And he said, I said, you know, when I was at Drury, I remember the beginning of my junior year, I had to decide. They were starting to make you focus a little bit. Am I either going to focus on business and economics or history and the law?
Mm-hmm.
And I made the decision to focus on business and economics, but I had some incredible history teachers, and there was just burning interest, and a lot of the papers I wrote in my later business education kind of had a historical feel to them. Mm-hmm. And so he said, well, you ought to come back to school and get a master's. And we've got this program that's for teachers to help them get master's, high school teachers. And so I enrolled in that. And
So you were in your 50s?
Yeah, late 50s.
Yeah, retired. And you just wanted to do it because you just loved history?
Yes, And he gave me the opportunity to apply for the program and enter it. And, you know, if that hadn't been instilled in me in a small school, I probably never would have developed it. Yeah. But the program here is wonderful. You have a wonderful history department. And about the time that I I guess I was about 3/4 of the way through the program, and I got named president of Drury, and I'm thinking, how am I going to go to school, teach a class, which I was doing, and be president of a university? And I decided to go ahead and give it a go, and I'm glad I did.
You finished your degree?
I did. I did.
I wonder if you're the first president of a university in the
don't know,
United States to actually finish a degree.
Dr. Nitzel greeted me with my diploma, gave me a big hug. It was kind of a magical moment.
You know, we'll hire some, you know, what they call ABD, open dissertation. We'll hire some people ABD, assuming then it'll be like, you got to finish your dissertation within the next 2 years or whatever. But I've never heard of a university president.
Well, you know what was really cool about it was Dr. Dickey was kind of guiding my thesis that I was doing, and I said, "Can I do something on Drury?" He said, "Sure." He said, "I said I have this." Just sense of confusion of why Drury, founded by liberal Congregationalists, where most of their first class were women, where they had 7 Native Americans that came from the Congregationalist missionary efforts in Oklahoma, where the class was, I think the total class, they would have been 18% minority if you counted the Native Americans. And why it took them 100 years to admit an African American. Yeah. And so that's what I did my thesis on. I went back and read Nathaniel Morrison's diaries,
Right.
and there were references in it to should we or shouldn't we, and I think it came down, as best I could tell, to the economics of it, and they were struggling for money, and the local money wasn't going to go there if they admitted African Americans, and once they got kind of trapped in that, they never could get out of it because the country
it took a national change of
Yeah.
mind. And,
But it was really interesting to be sitting at Drury and spending some of my off time going down and reading that stuff. It just gave me a great feel for the place and the tremendous history it has.
So, is your degree program in Ozarks? Did you focus on Ozarks?
That was the focus.
Yeah. So, I didn't grow up in the Ozarks. I grew up in Iowa. I didn't intentionally do this, but I bought in. When you look at the Ozarks that are portrayed in cartoons and television, and
Winter's Bone.
I never did read Winter's Bone, but it's like Beverly Hillbillies, and and I think a lot of people develop an opinion about just sort of a overall opinion of the Ozarks.
Backward.
It's not backward, economically depressed, a lot of illiteracy, a lot of you probably say incest, a lot of inbreeding.
All true in the beginning, and sadly still somewhat true now.
Yeah, but it doesn't really describe. I've been pleasantly surprised by the region in the 4 years I've been down here, and it's not. We're not just a bunch of Jethros and Ellie Mays, and I haven't seen anybody wearing a rope belt yet. Although sometimes I'll say, if that's what it takes to get funding, I'll wear a rope belt. Go barefoot. I do know one person in the Ozarks who regularly goes barefoot, and he's probably a multimillionaire.
Name names?
Can't remember his name, but he's the founder and owner of Baker Heirloom Seeds.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
And he said, I'd go barefoot in New York City if I could.
Yeah.
And he just prefers it, and but he's not a Jethro. He's a very astute businessman.
One of the things that's interesting about your observation is it's true, but this is an entrepreneurial enough place that they've managed to turn around and make money on it. Yeah. They've used it to their advantage. Yeah. You go to Silver Dollar City. Yeah. You go to all these places that prey on the legends and the lore.
So do you think we become almost like a self-fulfilling caricature now, where
sort of,
if that's what'll please the tourists, we'll act like what they think we are.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. I think I told you one of the comments that made me laugh. A close friend I grew up with in Branson and from kindergarten on, and we knew a lot of the same characters that I kind of blew up in Skunk Creek. And his reaction to Skunk Creek, he didn't really like it, and he's a writer and a reader. He said, not my kind of book, but he said, it's where Dogpatch meets Valley of the Dolls.
Yeah. Take that in a positive way. So maybe you can either correct me or affirm. I'd heard about Drury is located where it is because of the old North Springfield thing.
Yeah.
When it was founded, it was. We're going to found this college. I don't know if some congregational advanced team came in or something.
Yes. Yeah, they did.
And
there was a lot of competition for Drury.
Yeah.
Down in the far southwest Missouri, I think it was Neo's show.
Oh, really? So the congregational churches decided that we need a congregational college in southwest Missouri.
Yes.
And there was a site selection team?
Yep.
Selection team?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, really?
And Springfield won, and I wish I'd read my notes before I came out. I can't remember it all. That was a long time ago. But it was a very difficult competition. It took a guy named Samuel Drury, who Nathaniel Morrison had known, who invested some money in the original investment and had his money tied up in land and couldn't get it out. And it was just one of these deals. It's almost a miracle that Drury got funded and landed in Springfield.
Well, I didn't realize this, but it sounds like the founding and siting of Drury has some similarities with the founding of the Fourth Normal School, which is now called Missouri State University. There was a site selection team. Actually, the site was not on their short list, and the president of WashU was the chair of the site selection team, and Tom Johnson out of Osceola, the Johnson family, was on the committee. And so they're in this buggy going north on National Avenue, which is probably just a dirt road back then, 1903, I think it was, 1904. Maybe it was 1905. And the president of Washington University says, well, that's a good looking site over there. That looks pretty good. How come that's not on our short list? Well, John T. Woodruff was a co-owner of that plot of land, and he was in the buggy, so he made sure the buggy stopped, and they climbed under a wire fence, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
They found this 40-acre plot that became, so again, it was site selection and just go from there.
Yeah. It was principally an African American neighborhood that Drury was founded in.
Yeah. Graham's Rib Station was just south of current campus.
Yep.
So how'd you become president?
Wrong place at the wrong time, or right place at the right time.
Everybody stepped back faster than I could.
It is kind of a fascinating chain of events. I'd retired from banking, and Dr. Robert Wyatt was the head of the Breach School. And the Edward Jones Company had made a major commitment to start the Edward Jones Center for Entrepreneurship. And Dr. Wyatt was a friend, and he approached me and said, would you consider being our first executive director? And I said, sure. You know, I'm kind of bored now, and I'm not really doing anything constructive. So yeah, I would love that. And it's not a big job, but he said it could be. We want to grow this thing into a national treasure. And so I accepted that. They introduced me in April of 2007 as the new director of the Edward Jones Center. And in May, less than 3 weeks later, they introduced me as the interim president of Drury University.
So you were on a fast track.
Before I was introduced as the head of the Edward Jones Center, I was teaching a class in entrepreneurship. So as somebody, Jack Stacker, somebody said, that's the biggest career jump I've ever heard of in my life. You went from being a professor to a president of the university in less than 30 days. And, I took it thoroughly committed that it was going to be an interim position. I felt like that would be the right way to handle it, and that way I wouldn't get distracted. I was focused. Drury was having some pretty serious financial problems. I was focused on that and trying to stabilize things and settle things down on campus. And I got into the summer, and I just was caught up in what was going on, and the energy and the passion.
Caught up in a positive way.
That just was a very resilient campus, and they're so passionate. You can be like that. You went to Grinnell. So they're passionate places, and I'll never forget. We had move-in day, freshman move-in day, and so I went out and I moved students in, and we carried their stuff up the stairs and sat in their rooms and talked to their parents, and I was exhausted when I came home that night. I told my wife, it's probably one of the most exhausting days I've ever had, but I'm going to miss it next year. And she looked at me and she said, you don't need to, And that was the first opening of the discussion as to whether I should apply for the national search. It was underway. And with her permission and with her encouragement and with the encouragement of some people on campus and in the community, I went ahead and applied just a couple of days before the deadline in September, and went through the rest of the process. And they
so you were an in-house candidate, basically.
Yes, I was. And I was elected president in January of 2008. And
how long did you serve?
I served till June of 2013, so I served 6 classes. And it was a joy. I mean, what a incredibly different and unique experience for some kid that grew up in the world of banking, grew up in Branson, Missouri. It was just amazing.
So just to summarize, your wife has really been an excellent career coach.
She has. She has.
She first put the bee in your bonnet to apply for the full-time position, permanent position.
Yep.
And she steered you towards writing.
Yeah. Well, after 40 years, she knows me pretty well.
So what do you think? What's next? Is it you going to just continue writing fiction until you get burned out, or?
Well, I'm going to keep writing as long as I'm having fun. It really doesn't matter whether
sales don't matter.
anything comes out of it. I'm just having fun. Hopefully I'll find somebody to publish the second trilogy, and hopefully maybe even the guy that's doing the first one. I've also developed a keynote speech on leadership that's framed in the context of a river, and kind of using the river as a metaphor for effective leadership that I've seen in my career. And so I'm trying to sell that. Nobody's buying it. They want to hear it, but nobody's paid me anything yet. And I guess that's the way that stuff goes.
Yeah.
But I want to do that. And we've taken a real love to going hiking out in southern Utah, northern New Mexico, that part of the country. Never spent any time there before. And it's gorgeous. It's totally different than the Ozarks. The terrain's totally different, but it's got this same self-contained kind of renegade feel to it at the Ozarks do. And so we're going to keep doing that as long as we can keep upright.
Good. So you're smarter than the average bear regarding the Ozarks. Let's just deal with Ozarks history. What's most fascinating about Ozarks history for you?
Dr. Blevins' question, which I loved. You have a professor sometime that really gets to you, and he did with this question. And this was what I wrote my final paper on, is the question of whether the Ozarks is exceptional or whether it's just like other impoverished areas of the country, Appalachia, southern Mississippi.
It's just another Appalachia.
Yeah.
How'd you
And
answer
there
that?
are similarities.
How'd you answer that?
I said we're exceptional, of course. There's only one answer, but proving it was a little bit
There's
more
only one
challenging.
Branson.
No, but I think the economic development engine that has grown out of Ozarks culture speaks to that. It's a very entrepreneurial culture. You look at Springfield, we got more startup businesses than any place our size that I know of.
Yeah.
And it's a way of thinking here.
You look at John T. Wood, man.
Oh, absolutely.
And that guy went on for 40 years.
Yeah.
He was operating at a level that, no offense, but you and I couldn't sustain it for a year.
No way.
He did it for 40 years.
Yeah, I know. And look at the Herschen family.
Yeah.
They're the consummate entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And they have taken a culture and they've packaged it and made it family friendly.
Yeah.
And they've been very successful in selling it.
Yeah. But it's also they had the epiphany, like they were trying to sell cave tours.
Yeah, right.
And they realized, well, you got a bunch of, they're doing pretty well, but you got to put people up on top that are just kind of sitting around waiting for the cave tours.
Yeah.
So let's, so it kind of did a flip,
And that, their timing was impeccable. They opened Silver Dollar City the year after Table Rock Lake filled up.
Yeah.
So they had people coming to the area that wanted something else to do with their kids and entertainment wise, and it just took off, and they guided it in a very interesting trajectory.
But I mean, I agree with you. There's a whole history of entrepreneurship. Jim Owens, and you just sort of
Johnny Morris.
Yeah. There you go. I mean, it's
amazing what he's done.
Yeah, but what I've heard is that he just asked for some space in his dad's liquor store to sell, because he saw people were sort of buying liquor. They're headed down to go fishing and hunting, and so let's sell them some lures.
Yeah. I guess they call that synergy in graduate school.
That's right.
I think.
What they call that, horizontal monopoly or something, right?
Right.
So I agree with you. That's a real part of
and
this region.
Appalachia has never escaped the cycle of poverty, and there are places in the Ozarks that haven't either.
Yeah.
But as a whole, the economy here is vibrant.
Yeah.
And it's almost insulated from some of the pressures that other places in the country and the world get hammered with. The Great Recession hurt us, but it didn't put us out of business because we weren't overbuilt like Las Vegas and places like that.
What about the entertainment aspect of it? Because it seems to me, compared to Iowa, for example, there's entertainers come out from all regions of the world.
Cows made out of butter are pretty entertaining.
That's right. It's a whole subgenre to itself, butter sculpture. But it just strikes me, and I don't have any facts to back it up, but there's more entertainers have come out of the Ozarks per capita than probably, and actually kind of the hills, because you got the whole country music thing. And what is it about that, do you think? And let me give you
I don't know.
I'm starting to work on a book. Nixa, little old Nixa, which back in the day was 200 people, they brought out so many entertainers out of those 200 people.
Right.
It's like it must have been about half the population was musically talented.
Yeah. Well, the Ozarks Jubilee was,
Yeah.
they were pioneering in the country, and they drew talent from here,
Yeah.
and they drew talent to here.
Yeah, but the local talent was just
Yeah.
amazing. And so anyway, what do you think? Is it something in the water? Is it, I think it's the family structure, and actually part of the region, because it was, a little more isolated than maybe some other regions of the country. The fiddler was an important part of the community.
Absolutely.
If you're going to have entertainment,
Absolutely.
it's almost like, like a lot of communities now, it's like we got to have a physician. If we're going to be a viable community, we have to have a physician. It was like a physician, a preacher, a mortician, and a fiddler
Yeah.
were essential community
Right.
assets.
Well, it's a tough life here. The people that settled here, it was not easy, and like you said, you couldn't grow hardly anything
Yeah.
consistently. And they had to have a way of releasing, of entertainment, of making their lives bearable. And music and
Yeah.
telling tall tales was as good as it got back then.
Yeah. So that, it's just really, it's an amazing entertainment region.
Yeah.
I agree.
And then, even in my generation at Drury, I was there when John Dillon and Steve Cash and those guys were forming the Daredevils. And John is an amazingly interesting person. He was a philosophy major.
Hold on. I'm a former philosophy major, so be careful,
He's the consummate philosopher. Let me tell you, anybody can write lyrics like that. And they managed to find a niche and slip into it and make it happen.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Do you have any other thoughts you want to make? Any questions you hoped I'd asked you?
No. I'm just glad you all are doing this. I'm honored to be one that you're talking to. This is the kind of stuff that Vance Randolph did 50, 60 years later.
Yeah.
And it's not nearly as colorful as entertaining.
That's right. Don't tell any off-color jokes or anything. We did cite Donald Harrington's book.
Yeah, that's
so,
right. That's right.
It's embedded in there. So
Yeah,
if you want to get the good stuff, go read the stuff that we referenced.
The only thing I would say really that I believe so strongly is just reiterate my belief that the region is dependent on keeping its waters clean and protected and plentiful far into the future.
Yeah.
And if they ever lose that, then we're not exceptional anymore.
Yeah. Actually, I do want to ask you one more question.
Okay.
So,
Sure.
about the region. So it's a multi-state region.
Mm-hmm.
Most people define it geologically. And so you've got Missouri and Arkansas, of course, but you've also got eastern Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And part of Kansas is geologically is considered part of the Ozarks, the karst topography. Brooks Blevins, Professor Blevins, has done some interesting. I haven't seen it mapped, but he did some research where he just got access to all the yellow pages somehow, electronically, and he just looked for businesses that had Ozark or Ozarks or Ozarkian or just OZARK truncation symbol, and then he mapped it based upon their zip code and the fact that they had Ozarks in their name. And he said, well, if you want to define the Ozarks, who's calling themselves in the Ozarks? And it's interesting to see how do you? John T. Woodruff said St. Louis was part of the Ozarks. What do you? Some people say Southern Illinois is actually part of the Ozarks. It just got cut off by the Mississippi River.
Yeah, some of the topography is the same. I know if you go up to where Schoolcraft started his journeys in Potosi. And that area is very much like the Ozarks.
Yeah.
And he probably traced down a similar landscape to get down here.
Yeah, maybe for you, what is the Ozarks region? Are any Kansans Ozarkians?
The Ozarks is what you want it to be in the end, but I want it to be a region that is tied to water, that is tied to culture, that's tied to history, and that is unique and exceptional. Yeah. And I can't draw a boundary around that, but it's a feel to me.
But some people say, well, the Missouri River is the northern, Mississippi is the eastern, the Arkansas is the southern.
The geography is so different up north of Springfield, though.
Yeah.
The further north you get, the more different it is.
Do you think that it's a multi-state region is a problem or an opportunity?
An opportunity. I believe very strongly in regionalism, and state lines never have been an impediment to doing business unless the government gets involved and does stupid things. And there's no reason why a 4-state region, corners of it, is not a more effective common market than other places.
Do you think that most people who live in the Ozarks identify at least as much with the fact that they're in the Ozarks as they're in Missouri or Kansas?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the things that Gary Whitaker at 417 magazine and I had this discussion is there's a lot of concern about people coming into the Ozarks from California, from Chicagoland. Yeah.
I mean, the joke is some of the towns in the Ozarks are now basically suburbs of Chicago because there's so many retirees that have moved in there.
Right. And we talked about it, and we came to the conclusion, that the best way to assimilate that is to bring them into what we do. Get them to go on float trips. Get them to understand the self-deprecating humor and what we do as a culture in general. That's conservative, but it's progressive in some ways too.
Yeah.
And I think we both said, assimilate them. Don't drive them off. Don't try to keep them out because they're bringing value. Jim Owens, Branson, came from Chicago.
Yeah.
Herschel's never would have that. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not natives.
No.
What do you see as the biggest threat to the Ozarks?
Loss of water quality.
Drugs?
We can deal with drugs.
Yeah.
You can't replace a natural resource that's destroyed.
Yeah. I know there's some, I just saw something in the news that there seems to be some talk now about actually dismantling some dams around the country.
Yes, I've read some of that.
I don't know if we've actually done one, a major one yet.
Yeah.
I wonder how you get, how do you reclaim that
Don't think you could. I don't, and maybe it's just my lack of imagination. I don't see how you would do it here. I could see how you could do it out west.
Yeah.
And Oregon's one of the states that's begun to do that, so they can get their salmon run back.
Yeah, salmon runs.
There's a incredible story about the Glen Canyon Dam that was built on the Grand Canyon. It took away really almost as spectacular a landscape as the Grand Canyon has to offer.
Yeah.
And it now is evaporating because of drought. It's seeping down because it wasn't solid to begin with. And the lake is at some minimal percentage of its capacity. And all of a sudden, they're saying, has this served its time? Is it time to get rid of it and get the Colorado flowing again?
Yeah.
And I can't imagine, Lake Powell is a very popular tourist destination, but if you don't have water in it, people are going to stop coming to it, and you can't do anything about it. And then the other thing that just struck me, St. George, Utah, in the very southwestern corner of it, is about the size of Springfield, about 160,000 people. They've laid out plans to be 850,000 people in 10 years or 15 years. And they're short of water now.
Yeah.
And, that's the kind of thinking that just blows my mind. And hopefully we don't ever get into that kind of thinking.
Well, we may be facing some, I don't know what you call them, hydro refugees or something. There's a lot of major metropolitans out west that, boy,
Yep.
How's it go? Air first. If you get cut off from air, you're in trouble as a human being. Second is water. You can go quite a long time without food.
Yeah.
But
well, if you read if you get to Donnybrook, the third book, and the first book of the second one, I don't want to give away too much, but the scenario I paint is the West Coast drying up, and the people whose ancestors migrated there for gold are migrating back to the Midwest because there's water here.
So we had the Okies in the 30s. So in the 2030s, are these going to be the Callies or something?
I called it Californication.
You Californicated, get out of here! You're not wanted. Go pick our fruit. Or
having great fun writing that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that humorous note.
Good time to stop.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
I'm
Thanks very
blushing
much.
probably.
And I'm going to have to, you've ruined the rest of my afternoon because I'll be reading postcards from France.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank
I'm
you.
probably dipping into Donald Harrington again too. So
Thank you for taking the time.
Thank
I've
you very
really
much.
enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Yep.